and I'll be answering the questions. I'll be taking moments to pause, make sure that all of those get answered. And then at the end, I will essentially stay on the line for as long as needed to get the rest of the questions answered. So just to make sure that the chat function is working for everybody, I would love for you just to quickly type in one vegetable that you're excited to grow this coming season. Tomatoes, of course, that had to be the first one there, Laura. Okay, Mandy, butternut squash, nice. Eggplant, very cool. Passion fruit, awesome. Zucchini, Shelly, we're gonna be talking about those today. Cool. So some amazing stuff that is planned. Perfect. Well, the chat function is working, so let's start diving in. For those of you that I have not met yet before, my name is Jordan, and I am the founder here at Mind and Soil. And we're a gardening company based out of Squamish, British Columbia, Canada. And we approach things completely differently to probably every gardening company that you might have heard and come across so far. Our primary focus and our sole focus is on connecting individuals to the mental health benefits that come from gardening. And I'm a huge believer that one of the best ways to do that is through education. So that for all of you, rather than feeling overwhelmed and stressed and anxious about what should I be planning, am I on top of things, what do I need to order, is for us to hold your hand, educate you on those pieces so that you feel as comfortable and confident in your garden and able to get the absolute most out of it. So I'm going to be leading us through the session. My hope today is that each of you kind of takes one or two things from the garden planning guide that we're going to go through that will help you feel more comfortable and more confident over the course of the season. Now, I'm not sure what everybody's yards are looking like, but I'm guessing that they're something similar to this right now. It's still fairly cold out. We're more or less in the dead of winter still. This is my backyard about a week ago, and since then we've only gotten snow, so there is now no grass that you would be able to see. But the days are starting to get a little bit longer. The sun's coming out a little bit more, and I know that the excitement for like the year and the gardening season ahead is just kind of like vibrating off of everybody right now. And so what I'm hoping is to show you the exact guide that I use in my backyard in this exact area to ultimately turn it into this. And this is what it's going to be looking like in the middle of summer, where we've got tomatoes climbing up. We've got some cabbage over there, some peppers, onions, and potatoes, leafy greens, some basil and strawberries on the side. And so that you're getting kind of week over week bounties of all kinds of yummy and delicious vegetables and herbs. And of course, it's not really a gardening talk unless we mention tomatoes at some point in there. So we're definitely going to be talking about tomatoes, where they fit into the garden plan over the course of the session today. But kind of begs the question, like, where do we get started? And I think that this is an easy place to actually go a little bit off track, because one of the kind of most used resources out there is the planting chart that all of us could find online. And so this is a planting chart from West Coast Seeds. And this is an amazing, super useful resource. It's basically telling you, when to be planting all of the different vegetables that you could come across. And right now, at the end of January, if I were to grab this, I'm kind of full of energy and enthusiasm. I wanted to start planting seeds, getting things growing under the lights and ultimately into the garden. And if I looked at it, I'd say, okay, what can I get started in February? And I'd see, okay, broad beans, okay, clatonia, okay, leeks, mustard, coming down from there, pak choi. And then next thing you know, I've started all these seeds and I've dedicated the precious, valuable square footage that we have to grow to things that I don't even eat. And I don't even know what clatonia is, or if I pronounce that properly for that matter. And so this is a really amazing resource, but it can lead us a little bit off track at the beginning. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this to the side, and we're going to come back to this a little bit later on. And where we're going to get started with building our garden plan is by actually just taking a quick step backwards. And this is something that we're all going to do right now, kind of either on your own in a notepad or into the chat function. And so the first thing that I recommend that you do is you spend a moment or two thinking through what's your goal and objective for your garden. And I want you to take a couple minutes right now to write into your notepad, what are you hoping for? Is it yield and the amount of produce that you get from it? Is it rejuvenation? Is it the aesthetic? Something else? Go ahead and spend a couple minutes either writing that down, or if you're feeling up to it, go ahead and drop that into the chat box. We did this last week and there's some really beautiful and amazing answers that came through into the chat box. So if you're feeling comfortable and up to it, would love to see what a few of you are hoping for in terms of your goal, and then I'll share mine. Okay, kids can help. Succession planning with Laura. Ornamental and edible from Sarah. So for Shannon, kind of decreasing some of the stuff you buy from the grocery store and growing things that your family will eat. Perfect. And you're speaking my language there with fresh produce and therapy. Therapy for sure. Cool. Love to see that. And thank you guys for sharing that. So for myself, what are my goals? Because this is where I get started for my garden plan. And there's two of them. One is the restorative side of gardening and kind of having it as my sanctuary, my piece to recharge, my place to recharge my batteries. And the other piece that I just absolutely love about gardening is testing things and tweaking like just one variable at a time to get get new insights and learnings on what works best in the garden. But I don't associate any kind of my happiness or anything around the yield, because what happens in a year like last year where it's a frigid June and we don't have any tomatoes ripening until late July, early August, I could have been a little bit upset in that case. So those are the two goals that I have there: restoration and the testing side. Now, the second piece is let's grow things that we love to eat. So I want you to take a couple moments here and write down some of the vegetables and herbs that you love eating, because those are the things that we ultimately want to have in our garden. Now, what I've also written down there is write down a vegetable or some sort of gardening practice, right? It could be irrigation, it could be rainwater capture, something to do with the garden that you're really fascinated to learn more about and to try. And the reason why I want you to include one of those is because if you are fascinated by it, then you're going to give it that extra TLC and the kind of the time and the attention, which will ultimately give it a higher likelihood of success. Shannon, no dig, very cool. TJ, organic tea, you'll have to shoot me a message on that afterwards, because that's something we'll be spending a lot of time on this this coming season. Okay. So what I'm going to share with you next are the vegetables that I want to grow. And what you're going to see here is kind of like a little bit of a screenshot. And just before I get into those vegetables, tomorrow morning, I'm going to be sending you through the whole presentation, the recording, and a 3-page guide that is going to give you everything that you need to plan out your garden. So this is exactly what we're going to be going through. As you can see, here are those vegetables that I have listed on the computer screen. So this is going to be in your inbox tomorrow morning to go off of. And of course, you'll have the recording that we're going through today to refer back to anything and questions that you have. So the vegetables that I am going to be growing this coming summer are kale, Swiss chard, garlic, arugula, peppers, zucchini, and tomatoes. There might be one or two that I'll be adding in there, but today we're going to focus just on these ones. And the second part of that question is, what's the one that I'm fascinated by? And those are peppers. So I've done a little bit with peppers in the past, but this year I'm going all in on peppers. And this really started this last fall because I had one pepper plant and I came across it at the very end that you can overwinter peppers. So I brought it in, I moved it into the new Mine and soil, and put it under a grow light to see if it would start growing. And sure enough, here we are today, and it is not only doing super well, but I've since found out that you can actually turn pepper plants into bonsai type trees or bonchis, like a chili plant. So I'm completely fascinated, immersed in it, ripping through hours of content on YouTube, learning all the things about it. And that's why I like to have something in there that I'm fascinated by. The other piece for myself and the vegetables that I've chosen is that what I've realized over the last few years is that I really like vegetables that I can pick away at over the course of the season, and not so much the ones that are just one big head of broccoli all at once. Because what I found was that with those, it's like you got no broccoli, you got no broccoli, you got no broccoli, and then you got 8 heads of broccoli all at once. And you're like, what on earth do I do with all of this? So I prefer things that I can kind of graze away on, like a zucchini. It's gonna, have a zucchini in week, 11, 12, and then another one in week 13, 14, 15. And I don't have to do any follow-on planting, anything along those lines. So that's just a little bit of insight into how I arrived at these vegetables. And from a planning perspective, we're in a pretty good place. We've already got the vegetables nailed down, and we know that they're going to be going into our garden. So the next thing that we need to do is we need to draw our space. So step 2 here is drawing out your space. Just before we dive into actually drawing out the space, I'm going to pause for a moment to see if there's any questions on the first part of spending a couple minutes reflecting. So if there's any questions on step 1, go ahead and fire those into the chat, and I'll answer 1 or 2 of them here before we continue along. Okay, I think we're good. If not, I'll be able to get to it in a little while, so no stress there. Okay, I'm just seeing 1 or 2 coming through. Nithya, great question there. Is there a planting chart for different geological locations? Yes, there are. We are all in different planting zones. We touch on this in step 5. So I'm going to answer your question. If I don't answer it, then just ask it again towards the end. But the short answer is yes. I'm going to show you exactly how to find it. Okay, perfect. So let's dive in now to drawing our space. We're going to start by going back to that picture of my backyard. And so again, I have a raised bed here, second raised bed, third, and fourth. Each of these are just kind of like your standard 4x8 foot beds. Now, I do have this little herb box on the side here, and I've got some garden space on the back end. Out of the interest of time here, I'm not going to touch on those 2 areas. I'm going to keep it simple, and we're just going to focus in on the main 4 raised beds that I have here. So I know my space. I now need to get that down on pen and paper. And so what you can see here is I've drawn my space out. Super, super simple. Those are bed 1, bed 2, bed 3, bed 4. And again, the growing guide that I'm going to send to you tomorrow morning, it has all of that right there. So you've got graph paper that you're going to be able to draw it all into once you've printed it out. Now, if you were to not use that, you need to divide it into 1 foot squares. So this is why graph paper is really, really great, because we can just make the assumption that each one of these lines is 1 foot. So this is 1 foot across, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot. I immediately now know that that's a 4 foot by 8 foot bed. Makes it super, super easy. Again, if you don't have graph paper, then you'll just need to draw in those lines yourself. Now, the third piece that we do here is something that kind of, I think, gets overlooked every now and then. We want to add the sun and the amount of sun that each of the beds receive. So as you can see, the first bed here, it is receiving full sun. The second bed, it's also receiving full sun. Now, the third and the fourth bed, they're only receiving kind of like partial or half sun. Why is that? Well, let's go back and let's take a quick look at my house again, but from a different angle. And what you see now is there's bed 1, bed 2, bed 3, bed 4. What do we see on this side? We've got my house blocking the sun coming into beds 3 and bed 4. And what that means for beginning to build out our plan is that these 2 beds, we don't want to put things in there like our tomatoes or our peppers that are going to need tons and tons of sun. We actually want to put things in there like, say, a spinach or an arugula that if it gets too much sun, it's going to bolt and go to seed earlier on. So by knowing where the sun is, because we can't do anything about the sun, we're going to be able to start efficiently and effectively using our space. The other piece that you can add on at this point, not 100% mandatory, is just the direction that the sun is going as well. So for me, it rises on this side, it goes over the beds, and then kind of behind the house, and it sets over here. And the reason why this is important is because what would happen if we put our tomatoes that are going to grow 7, 8, 9 feet tall right here? Well, that means that everything on this side, once the sun has gone past it, is essentially going to be blocked from the sun, and it's going to create an artificial wall right in the middle of our garden beds. So we would actually want to put our tomatoes way on the end here so that as the sun climbs throughout the day, it's not going to be hitting all those beds and blocking the sun there. Okay, I'm going to pause for just a second because a couple questions have come through here. So from Kasha, is it different if we were planting straight in the ground and not in beds? There is not a difference in terms of the size, right? So if you had a 4 foot by 8 foot, or using that exact example, if the wood wasn't around those beds and they're still 4 foot by 8 foot, you would just kind of carve that out into a 4 foot by 8 foot section. The one thing that I would recommend is if you are planting directly into the ground, there's usually a lot of clay, a lot of silt. So work in a lot of compost, organic matter into those so you get a nice loamy soil there. Okay, so from Shannon, when we're talking 16 hours of sunlight in a day here in BC in the summer, what is the number of hours a tomato versus a spinach would need? Well, if you have 16 hours of sun and like all of your garden space is in 100% sun, your tomatoes, they'll be loving it. Your spinach, they're going to be like shooting for the sky, bolting straight away. And so in an instance like that, you might actually need to create a bit of a shade sail for those plants that don't require full sun. And then question from Christine, I only have 2 beds, 4 foot by 8. Can I plant my tomatoes in the same place each year? A lot of people talk about crop rotation. For myself, I plant my tomatoes in the exact same place every single year. When we did this last week, there was a lady, I believe she was calling in from Nashville, Tennessee, and she said that she's planted for like 4 or 5 or 6 years straight in the exact same area. So Christine, you're all good there. And the one caveat that I potentially would add is that that is the case if you are amending your beds with either some sort of fertilizer or compost and worm castings. And so the concept of like crop rotation, that came into existence from massive crops where they aren't able to amend all of the beds. They need to give them time and years to rejuvenate. So for us, where we've only got a couple beds, it's pretty easy to amend again with either fertilizers or compost and worm castings there. Yep. So from Suzanne, she just chimed in on that exact same point. Definitely amend the soil. I believe I saw a question from Christy there. Christy, I did not include which of the plants need full sun versus partial sun. My big fear with this was like information overload, but we could talk about that one kind of offline afterwards. Or as you're building your plan, just Google how much sun and then the vegetable name, and that will allow you to kind of fill in the blanks there. Okay. Amazing questions coming through from everybody. Keep firing them in. And this is how we're going to go through the session with me just kind of bouncing into those questions and back into the guide here. So we've got those. Now, this kind of raises an interesting point. I'm not sure if it will relate to anybody, but what if you only have a patio? And in this instance, what I want you to do is with the graph paper, draw out the entirety of your patio. So the full workable space. And then what I want you to do is I want you to take like a Sharpie and block off the areas that you cannot grow. So like where your table is, where your barbecue is, etc. So that we're left with, okay, we now know where we could put pots, grow bags, planters. And then you're going to follow that same process of adding the sun. Which parts of your patio receive the most sun? And we are going to take over your patio, completely change it from whatever it was, and turn it into a garden. I don't offer any services in convincing your significant others or spouses of that, but run with it and ask for forgiveness afterwards. So that's what you're doing for the patio gardeners out there. Okay, so we've got the space drawn out and we know which vegetables we want to have in the space. There's only one really big thing left to do, and that's adding them into the space. But this is also where it gets a little bit complex because there's some plants like a zucchini that's going to grow massive. And there's other plants like a head of garlic that are fairly small. So how many do we fit into each of the different parts of the garden? Well, on the second page of the guide that I'm going to send through to you, there is a sizing chart here, and I'm going to walk you through each vegetable. But on this chart, it's going to tell you how many you can fit into each square, and if you can fit more than one plant into that square, as well as if you need more than one square for a specific plant. So this is going to get maybe a little bit complex or confusing the first time that you see it. We're going to go slow. I'm going to pause a couple times. I want any questions that you have to come through into the chat box, because if we nail this part, then we are off to the races. So we go back to that very first thing that we did. The first vegetable that we put down was kale. I know that kale does not love full sun, so I'm going to put it into one of those two beds that had only half sun. Now, before I do that, I'm going to my space planner, which is on page 2, and I'm going to find where kale is listed. So we can see down here, how many squares are required for one kale plant? Only one square. And can I fit multiple kale plants into that one square? No, I can only fit one plant into the square. Perfect. So each square that I give to kale is going to be representative of one plant. So now I go back to my drawing and I write in all the kale plants that I want to grow so that it looks like this. So you can then see there the bed that's only receiving half the sun because kale doesn't love tons of sun. I've now written in kale plant 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 12, 16, 20. Now I'm going to pause for a second because this to some people could be like, that is way too many kale plants. But for me, I absolutely love kale. It's probably my favorite leafy green. You can do like amazing salads with it. You can do crisps with it. There's so many different uses. And my kale from last season is still in my garden right now. So for me, this is totally worthwhile to dedicate a ton of space towards kale. This is where personal preference completely kind of plays into what you would want to be having in your garden. But that's the rationale on my end. Okay, so kale, fairly straightforward, right? It's one square and it's one plant in the square. Well, let's kind of crank it up a notch here and get a little bit more complex. So the next one was Swiss chard. So first thing that we do is we go to our space planner, we find Swiss chard. How many squares are required for Swiss chard? Only one. How many Swiss chard plants can we fit into each square? We can fit 2. So each square that we dedicate to Swiss chard is actually going to be 2 plants. So knowing that, I now go to my drawing and I start putting in the Swiss chard letters. And I'm going to keep them in the same bed because they can also do just fine without tons and tons of sun. So I've got Swiss chard, 1, 2, 3, 4. But again, keep in mind that in each of these boxes, we can fit 2 plants. So that's actually 2, 4, 6, 8, 16, 24, I think. Don't hold me to it. We're going to come back to that at the end when we add it all up. But I think that that is 24 Swiss chard plants because we're fitting 2 into each square. Okay, what's the next vegetable that we have on our list? Garlic. Now, I don't know about you guys, but like I absolutely love garlic. And so I want to have a lot of heads of garlic coming out of my garden beds here. Okay, we're following the same process over to our space planner. How many squares do I need for garlic? Only 1 square. And for each square of garlic, I can fit 4 cloves that will turn into garlic heads into each of those. So that's basically just spacing them out 6 inches between one another. That gives us, a lot of garlic that we can potentially raise and grow in a fairly small area. But like I said, I love garlic, so I'm still going to give it a ton and a ton of space. And so I've nearly dedicated a whole bed just to growing garlic. I'm not sure if anybody out there is growing garlic this season, but I know that like right now I'm going out there and I'm looking every day. I'm moving the mulch over to find, whether the garlic's starting to shoot through. And the other day I first saw like the first like 2 or 3, and then of course I went out there like every single day after that. And now like you can see across the bed, like every single one of the heads starting to pop out. So I'm thrilled. I'm over the moon. And each of these boxes is 4 garlic plants. So to answer Suzanne's question there, TJ, yeah, to answer your question there, I believe you can do a really short garlic season if you were to plant right now. They're going to be smaller, but I believe that you can be starting them right now. The most common, though, is to be doing it kind of like mid to late October. Okay, we've got a couple other questions that are coming through here. So from Adele, aren't some plants incompatible? So there are some where you wouldn't want to be planting, say, a zucchini directly beside a squash, because if a bee, a pollinator, goes into the zucchini male flower, gets pollen, and then goes over to the squash female fruit and pollinates it, you're going to end up with this hybrid that doesn't really taste all that great. So you have to be a little bit careful on a few pieces like that. Great question there, though. From Karen, can you plant garlic in a container? Yes, you absolutely can. Manon, I'm not sure what the question on asparagus is there. Feel free to kind of clarify it and I'll circle back to it. So we've got our garlic in the beds now. On to the next one, arugula. You guys know the drill now. Over to the space planner. How many squares are required? 1. How many plants per square? 4. I'm going to go ahead and drop that into the same bed as, the garlic there. And what you can see is that I've got 8 boxes set aside. But for each of those, we're going to be able to fit 4 arugula plants in there. Okay. So we've got 2 of the beds completely full here. I'm seeing a couple more questions coming through here. So I'm just going to dive into those. From Manon, so following up on your asparagus question, is it viable to grow here? Yes, you can absolutely grow asparagus here in the Pacific Northwest. And then from Suzanne, you had the same question as Shannon. Can you plant a zucchini next to a cucumber, or should you separate those? Yes, you can plant those beside one another. Last year I had zucchinis and then I had cucumbers right beside there. So you're all good on that front. Okay. And just like to keep in mind as well, right? Like it's a guide on that front. So, it could be that you have your squash, 20 feet away because that's all the space that you have. A bee could still end up over there. Or it could be that you have them directly beside one another and there isn't any cross-pollination that happens all season. So it's going to be its own little environment that happens out there. And if you wanted, you could even get in there and start hand pollinating some of them. Okay, so we've got 2 of the 4 beds covered and nailed down. Let's move on to the last 2 beds here. And these 2 beds are both receiving full sun. So what's the next vegetable that we put on the list to fill in there? And those are pepper plants. And now this is where we shift a little bit because a pepper plant is much larger than, say, a garlic plant or arugula. So we go to the next page on our guide, the space planner, and we go and we look up peppers. Now peppers, they move from the left column over to the right into our large plants. And so for each pepper plant, you are going to be using 2 squares. And in each of those larger squares, it's only 1 plant. So what does this look like on the actual drawing of your garden? Well, you can see here that I've drawn a little dotted line to break out 2 squares, and then I've got a pepper plant and nothing beside it because it needs those 2 squares. It needs that space to grow. And then I've got the next pepper plant, 3rd and 4th. Now, one other thing that I want you to note here is that you can see I've alternated the spacing. So if in the first row, I'm doing a pepper plant right against the far left side of that bed, well, then the next row, I'm going to do it over a little bit. This is just going to create more space between each of the plants while still getting us the most ideal number of plants into that bed. Okay, so we've got our peppers now into the beds, quite a few of them there. I believe that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's move on to the next one. Zucchinis. All right, if you've grown zucchinis, you know that these get massive, massive, massive. So we go into our space planner. How many squares are required for a zucchini? 4 squares. And in each of those, we're of course going to only be fitting 1 zucchini plant. So back over to our drawing, let's find a place where we can carve out 4 squares for our zucchinis. And I'm gonna put them beside the peppers there. And as you can see, I continued with the dotted lines of breaking it into 4. And then, I've used those, basically 4 sets of 4 to put in 4 zucchini plants. Okay. I'm going to pause here before we get to the last bed because there've been a couple more questions that come through. These questions that you're all asking are absolutely amazing. We're probably at like 30 or 40 at this point. I'm totally cool if we end up into the hundreds. So just keep on firing those through and we'll get them either during the presentation or at the end. So from Christine there, would you plant Elysium or something between your pepper plants? You absolutely could put something small in there like a spinach or a basil, etc. And I believe that there's even like in the very like kind of like standard approach to square foot gardening, I think that they only put it as 1 square needed for peppers. So this is where I deviate from it a little bit. And the rationale for that is that I want to give my plants a little bit more space so that they're not creating shade and blocking the sun from one another. And also for say something like zucchini, there's airflow happening between each of the leaves because when we get to July, when we get to August and it gets hot and it gets humid, powdery mildew just thrives in those environments and we need air flowing through them. So for myself, I'm going to err, I'm not sure if that's a pun or not, on the side of caution and give them a little bit more space. Okay, from Christy there, maybe silly question, but if you have 1 kale plant per square and doing it from seed, is it okay to plant more seeds and pull out the sprouts, leaving just 1? Christy, I want you to take a look at this. So these are baby kale plants here. And these are just over a week old. They are the happiest little campers that I've ever seen. And what I would do now is that I've got 4 out of the 5 that have successfully sprouted. And this one looks really good, but this one actually looks a little bit stockier. And so I would now nip the other 3. I would keep that one. And this would then represent 1 of the squares that I'm going to place. And I would start another 15 of these at the same time underneath the lights. So that's the way that you go about it. If you are going to be direct sowing, as they come up, you just make the call at that point that like, okay, this is about a foot. I'm going to nip the other 2, 3, 4, 5 that are in there and leave 1 so it has enough space to come through. Great question, Christy. Okay, let's see. From Charlene, should you stagger planting the zucchini? Yes, if possible. They're going to grow so crazy that it might be a little bit difficult to even do that. What I would probably be thinking through there is how am I pruning it back in a way so that you're kind of growing in different directions. And in my instance, probably like kind of overflowing out of the garden beds that they're going to be in. From Karen there, how do you try and factor in companion planting recommendations, both complementary and antagonistic? So I think that we could probably spend like a whole session just on companion and complementary planting. That's where we start getting into things like a little bit more complex and like, are we companion planting to fit as much into a small square footage or because of the benefits that the plant have for one another? So if it's okay with you, let's take that one offline. Maybe send me an email at jordan@mindandsoil.com and we can talk through a little bit of that because say for those patio gardeners that are out there, companion planting is going to allow you to get the absolute most out of that much smaller square footage that you have. Christine, can my pumpkins run into the grass or should I keep them off somehow? I think on this one, in many ways, we don't have any choice in that they're going to run wild just because that plant grows like crazy there. Okay, from Eva, we have animals in the backyard, squirrels, birds. Do we need to worry about them? I would say most likely. And there's lots of different ways that you can fence them off. And you can use different like wool covers, etc., to cover off on your beds so that birds and squirrels, etc., aren't able to get in there. That's always going to be part of it. From Hannah, or do a whole other webinar on companion planting. Not a bad idea at all. And we do have some more coming up. So we'll touch on that towards the end here. Okay, amazing questions from folks. I think we got to fill out that last bed. I want to hear in the chat though, what's the one vegetable that we're missing that all of you want to have in your gardens? There it is. Oh, I thought everybody's gonna be saying tomatoes. We got peppers, flowers, peas. No, the last one that I had on my list there was, of course, tomatoes. And for myself, I'm going to give them a healthy amount of space here as well. So just as we have on all the other ones, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go to the space planner. I'm going to see how many spaces do I need for my tomato plants. 2, 1 plant going into each of those large squares. Back over to our drawn out garden bed. We pop it in there. And next thing you know, we've got 16 tomato plants getting ready to go. And like you can all see here, this is exactly what I've drawn out on the piece of paper. So it's really as simple as that, in terms of taking the vegetables from here, finding them on the space planner, which is over there, and then into the beds. I'd love to hear if this has been like, we're going to do step 4 and step 5, but this is the part that I was worried about maybe being a little bit confusing. Has that been straightforward? Does that make sense? Are there any questions on how to go about taking the vegetables that we know we want to grow and getting them into the beds? Okay, I'm seeing a couple awesomes. Makes sense. Perfect. Okay, great. Well, let's dive into step 4. So what we can see here, right, is that we've got all the vegetables nailed down. We need to add it up now. And again, some of these, each little square is going to be representing 2 plants or 4 plants. So how many total plants do we have? And if we're starting from seed, how many seeds do we actually need to be getting started then? So we've got each of our plants. What you're going to do is you're going to go to your drawing and you're going to add up each of them. So for my kale squares, I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all the way up to 16. And then Swiss chard, et cetera, et cetera. So once I've added those all up, I've now got them right down here. So 20 kale squares, 12 Swiss chard squares, 20 garlic squares. But this isn't representing the number of plants because taking garlic as an example, we can plant more than 1 in each of those squares. So the next thing that we do is we go to the space planner and we grab the number of plants per square. So as you can see here, like using garlic as the example there, we have already taken the 1. Now we take the 4 and we add that into the next line. So I've now got 20 kale squares drawn and 1 plant in each of those squares. I've got 12 Swiss chard squares drawn, and I've got 2 plants going into each of those, all the way down the list. All that we have to do is multiply those to find the number of plants that we're going to hopefully be growing in our garden. So for me, it's going to be 20 kale plants, 24 Swiss chard, 80 heads of garlic, 48 arugula plants, 16 pepper plants, 4 zucchini plants, and 16 tomatoes. I get excited just going through that and reading it. But it could also be that you're like, dang, that is way too much Swiss chard. I'm never going to get through all that. So at this point, give yourself permission to maybe go back through there, make some adjustments, some tweaks, erase some of the ones, dedicate more space to your tomatoes or to your peppers, play around with it a little bit. And again, like, do this in some sort of relaxing mode. Do it by your fire, do it over a drink, go to your bar or cafe and jot it out there. Have fun at this point, planning it all out before we get into the season. Okay, I've got a couple more questions coming through there. first one from Bud, was there a connection for sun exposure per plant on the guide? I answered this one a little bit earlier. No, I did not put the sun or the amount of sun on there. I think I should add that on. I didn't want to overwhelm folks, which is why I left it off. But that's come up twice on this one, so probably worthwhile to add that on. Manon, great. Love to hear that this is useful for you. Shelly, love to hear that as well. Christine, can you help with how to stagger the harvest time? Do we leave some squares blank initially? Christine, this is an amazing, amazing question. And I think that this also is like another topic that we could probably do a bit of like a follow-up happy hour on in almost like in April, when like the seedlings are under the lights, but it's too soon to put them into the beds. Because you know, built into this, I know that I've got like 3/4 of a bed for garlic that is going to be coming out in late July. And because of that, about a month earlier, I'm going to be starting a bunch of carrots and beets and fall vegetables. And I'm going to be starting them a month earlier, even though they're rooted plants. I'm going to start them in little seedling containers. And in one day, I'm going to pull out all those heads of garlic, amend that bed, and transplant in that fall harvest all at once. So amazing question. Definitely factors into it. Definitely is like, you know, if this was garden planning 101, I'd put that into like garden planning 201. But would love to hear if folks want to do a garden planning 201. Just go ahead and in the chat say, yes, I'd be totally up for that. And I can potentially, okay, I'm seeing a whole bunch of yeses coming through, so we might have to get that onto the books there. Okay. All right. So you've made any adjustments that you want. You've got your final set of plants that you want to have in your gardens. There's two paths that we can now go: buy seedlings or start seeds. If you're buying seedlings, you've now got your list that you're going to the nursery with or to the you know, garden center with to buy. And you know, in this instance, there being 16 tomato seedlings that I would want, I would need to make sure that I buy 16 tomato seedlings. Now at $4, $5, $6 each, the price tag on that could begin to add up really, really quickly. And that's where I would recommend starting from seed. I am going to be doing another session in just a few weeks' time on the method that I use for starting seeds. And let me show you real quick. This method is like the easiest thing ever, and it gets me a plus 90% successful germination rate. So I'm going to be walking through everybody through how to do that, and it's super, super straightforward. So if we're starting from seed, my recommendation is that you start 5 seeds for every plant that you want in your garden. So let's take zucchini as an example, because it's the lowest number and going to be easiest on my simple brain here. If we wanted 4 zucchini plants, we need to start 5 seeds for each of those zucchini plants. 4 multiplied by 5 means that we would have 20 seeds, zucchini seeds to start. Same thing as we did above. We're just going to multiply these across. There are going to be a few exceptions like garlic or potatoes where we're not starting from seed and we're starting from a clove. And so it won't work completely universally on those, but the rest of them go off of 5 if you're starting seeds for the first time. And I would never go less than starting 3 seeds in each cell that you're going for. Okay, so I now have my seed list of all the seeds that I need. And this is where I would go on to westcoastseeds.com. I literally did this yesterday, and I would buy each of those seeds, or I'd go to a garden center and I'd buy them to a nursery and I'd buy the seeds I need. And now this might sound like a lot of seeds, right? Like 120 Swiss chard seeds or 100 kale seeds. And I want to just like kind of calm everybody for a second on that. And I'd love for you guys to have a guess at how many kale seeds are in here. You can see from my hands, like it's pretty much empty all the way down to here. But I'd love to see some guess on how many kale seeds you think are in this little packet here. Okay, 120, 100, 1200, 40, 200, 500. So I'm just reading the label here. There's 2,500 seeds in here alone. So when we look at those numbers, they might look a little bit big, a little bit daunting, but do know that like that is not too many seeds at all. And for me, this is 4 big 4x8 beds. So for, depending on each of your garden spaces, it could be much less than this. So don't get overwhelmed by seeing some big numbers there. It works back really, really easy and straightforward. So at that point, we now know, okay, these are the plants that I want to grow, and I'm starting from seed. I know how many seeds that I want. Where do I get, or like, when do I start them off? And this is where we come back to where we got the whole presentation started with, and that's with our planting chart. And so that guide that I showed you at the very beginning here, the chart from West Coast Seeds, this is the perfect time to really start to lean into it and incorporate it. So coming back to Nithya's question, I can't remember the exact city, Nithya. I know it is in Ontario. I'm just going to go off of Toronto. If you wanted to find your local planting chart, you're just going to type in your city name and then gardening zone chart. So Toronto gardening zone chart. And then there's going to be links that pop up, take you to the pages. For us out in BC, we're super fortunate because West Coast Seeds has put an amazing one together. So you would just go onto West Coast Seeds and you would see, basically your region. And then you're going to have everything nailed down and easy to follow along. All that you have to do is then find the vegetables that you're growing, so arugula, and the month that it says to start them in. So arugula, March. And then that's the last piece that we add into our guide. And so just like that, over the course of an hour here, we've been able to find out that, okay, 1 month from now, at the beginning of March, I've got the green light to start my kale, to start my arugula, to start my peppers, and to start my tomatoes. And if anybody wants to join me in starting those on like a live seed starting class, type it into the chat that you're like, yes, I'd love to be a part of that. And I could potentially put a session together where I start my seeds and all of you start your seeds. So we're doing it all together at the same time, answering questions on the go. Be more than happy to do that. But with that, you've got everything that you need. You started with the vegetables that you want to grow. You drew out your space, your garden space, and found a place, and not only a place, but the best place for each of them in your garden. You figure out how many total plants that's going to be and how many seeds you're going to need to be starting. And lastly, when to be getting them started. So that was everything that I wanted to cover off on today. Thank you all so much for all the questions that have come through. Like I said, I want to help you feel more comfortable, more confident in the garden. So if there are any additional questions, I would absolutely love to open it up to questions here for the kind of as long as we need. If you don't have any questions, by all means, kind of head into your evening here. Thank you so much for joining. And otherwise, feel free to just start firing in questions to the chat box and I'll start getting to those. My happy hour is about to start. Now that we're through this, I can crack my beer. So I might have to grab that in a minute or two. Okay, thank all of you for the questions. Charlene, yes, I will be emailing out the kind of the RSVP links for the following happy hours that will be coming up. The next one is definitely going to be on seed starting. And then I'm also going to be sending out different videos on tests that I've been doing. So like I mentioned, like I love testing, figuring different things out. I was doing a test like last year at some point, and I went to start a whole bunch of seeds and like nothing started. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? And I couldn't figure it out for like a week or so. And then I realized I put those seeds right by my garage door as we were like going into the fall, and the garage isn't heated. And so, and they're on the like cement of the foundation where it was super cold. And so I was like, I wonder if that area, because it's colder, decreased the germination rate. So I then took the exact same plants. I created 4 different temperature zones in my house at 50 Fahrenheit, 60 Fahrenheit, 70 Fahrenheit, and 80 Fahrenheit. And I basically tried to start them using the same seeds, same soil, every variable the exact same. And I'm going to be sharing the results with everybody by video over the course of the next few weeks here as you all go into your seed starting kind of time frame. The one thing I'll say right now is make sure you start your seeds in a room that is at least 70 Fahrenheit. That's the one little spoiler that I'll give to everybody right now. You're welcome, Mike. You're welcome, Laura. Glad to hear that the hour flew by. Nithya, you're welcome. Jamie, thank you. Yes, Vanessa, garden planning 201, we're going to have to get through at some point. So a question from Christy there. Do you recommend to start from seed inside the house and then move them outside, or is it okay to start straight into the garden? So Christy, you absolutely can direct sow into your garden beds, or you can start inside under the lights. For myself, I start everything indoors. A couple reasons behind that. Here in BC, the temperature in the evenings, like it still dips well below that 70 Fahrenheit mark that I kind of see as the golden standard for germinating so long into the spring and even early summer. So I see a lower germination rate once you start getting below 70. And because of that, like I want to have the highest percent of my seeds germinating, which is why I'm like, I'll start way fewer inside. I'll get them nice, big, and healthy in a controlled environment. I don't have to worry about like squirrels or birds or pests eating them when they're really small little baby seedlings. And then I harden them off over the course of a 2-week kind of period. Rest assured, everybody, we're going to be doing a happy hour on how to harden off your plants so that they can move from indoors to outdoors. But for myself, that just gives me like a very high degree of success to mirror the plan that I'm putting in place with what my garden actually ends up looking like. Using the chart, we could do peas in the spring, then after harvest, switch that square to tomatoes. Absolutely, Lucille. From Crystal, I noticed you don't have artichokes on that list. Any tips for starting or spacing? Crystal, I have never grown artichokes in my life, and so I would not take any advice from me on that one. You'll be much better off just doing a quick kind of search or looking around on YouTube or Google, and you'll find tons and tons of really great information there. But I would totally set you up for failure if I tried to answer that. Suzanne, yeah, information for taking the starts into the ground. Absolutely going to do that session on hardening them off kind of over again, like a 2-week period from indoors to outdoors. Last year, I posted a soil Saturday and I had I was giving them tons of water on certain days. I had like my leaf blower and I was blowing them with like really hard wind on other days. They were battle tested by the time that they made it into their forever home. Christine, what's basic prep for beds? Should we start amending now? Compost and worm castings. Amazing question. Also has already been penciled in as a topic for a happy hour. We're going to be getting to that one in April. As kind of like there's two, I suppose, schools of thought on this. You could either go down the path of like fertilizing and using something like Gaia Greens 444 to mend the beds as you get closer to the season is great. If you're going down the other path, which is more like the organic and natural path, then compost, worm castings, you're right on the money with those two. I would probably put those in like 3 to 4 weeks before planting your seeds. Now, I'm saying that you kind of based on where we are right now in the calendar. For myself, I amend my garden beds at the end of the season, so like kind of like November timeframe, and then I do a soil test in April, and then based on that soil test, I kind of make any like big changes that I would need to if things are out of whack. But I very much like going the natural and the organic path, and because no two compost piles are the same, you're not going to be getting it down to a complete science that like you're adding this much phosphorus or this much potassium, but rather all the beds have just like a really healthy level of your macronutrients, your micronutrients, and then all the microbial life sitting beneath that eating away at it. Okay. From Natasha, another question about soil amendments, inexpensive options. Should I put leaves on beds in winter? So Natasha, if you go on to mindandsoil.com and you click on the learn button, there's a article in there that's basically like 5 steps for closing off your garden beds at the end of the season. It's at that point that like, yeah, you're going to want to grab up as many, piles of leaves as you can and pop those onto your beds. And then tuck them away with that. I go a step further. I put landscape fabric over top to keep all the leaves compressed down and keeps them from blowing away. So a little bit more insulation, a little bit tidier, all that good stuff. But yeah, lots that you could do there. And continuing on like the soil amendment. And actually the next question there from Charlene is recommendations for soil amendments. So, beginning at the beginning of the season, right? Like the first thing that you're going to be doing is you're starting your seeds. For myself, I'll show you real quick. 1 second. So these are 2 kale plants, started the exact same day. This one is in the Mind and Soil worm casting seedling blend that we have. And this is just in like your store-bought feed. I'll have like high definition pictures coming out in the next bit, but I'm a huge believer in getting them into some nutrients and microbes early on, so that they're getting not only the nutrients, but also all the microbial life, all the bacteria that they need to grow strong and healthy. So beginning of the season, I would say from an amending perspective, I'm thinking of seedling mix that has compost, worm castings, perlite, which is why we've of course built our seedling mix based off of those 3 pieces. Then if you're going into, garden beds or into pots, you've got your 2 paths when it comes to amending. You could either go with your fertilizers like a Gaia Green 444, or you could go down the path of compost plus worm castings plus compost tea. The difference there, primarily being that if you go down the fertilizer path, like, definitively that is a 444 feed. If you go down the compost path, you're never going to know 100% what, say, the macronutrients are going to be on it, or the micronutrients, or how much microbial life it's going to have. So you give a little bit away in terms of knowing exactly what's going in there. But it's 100% natural. It's a much more sustainable option, doesn't use any fossil fuels to create it, etc. And both will give you great results. Okay, what is Squamish's planting zone? 7B. From Laura, if the room isn't 70F, would heating mats make up for the temperature difference? Yes, absolutely. So if you can't find an area that is 70 Fahrenheit, I would recommend making the, essentially like $20 to $30 investment into a heating mat. I use the Vivo Sun ones every now and then, and that will get you kind of close to like that 80 range. When you do start getting up towards 80, keep a closer eye on the water level, or like the moisture level, to make sure that they're not drying out and kind of going a little bit fray. That's, kind of what happened to the smaller one of these 2 plants here. Okay. From Candace, is there an easy way to determine how much sun your garden gets? I would say, if possible, become a lifelong gardener and just kind of track it from year to year, and you get a bit of a feel for where it's at. There is a YouTube video out there where it basically shares that from the shortest day of the year to the longest day in the year, the shadows get 75% smaller. So we're a month away from the shortest day of the year. If there's a sunny day, go and look at your shadows and know that in the peak of summer, with the sun going to a higher level, that shadow is going to come back probably still like 50%. But on this front, you can take a guess at it. The best way to learn, though, is just like season over season. I just moved to Squamish in 2019. Last year was my first year gardening here. I could have made some really like educated guesses just based off of the first month. And like last year, I planted my garlic in like the one place. There's this one peak on my roof that just like leaves a shade spot in this one part of my bed. And that was exactly where I planted my garlic last year. So somehow it still turned out really, really well, but that was, a learning that I couldn't necessarily foresee last year. Okay, great question. From Bud, how many grow lights are you running? You can probably see just down in the corner over there. That's my grow light area. I have 3 going right now. They're only 2 feet long. That is because I am currently testing different grow lights in the less than $50 category. Because if you're just starting seeds by grow lights, you don't need to be taking them the full plant cycle. You just need to get them nice and strong and hearty before moving them outside. So I don't think that you need to spend more than $50, which is why I'm doing that test. So if you are looking at buying grow lights, I can let you know which ones I like and that are performing best from the test that I'm doing. If I wanted to set that space up most optimally, I've got 3 racks in there. And I would put a 4-foot light going across each of them. So that'd be 3 4-feet long lights. From Nithya, do your grow lights influence the temperature around the seedlings? Great question. Give me 20 seconds. Okay, what you can see here, I have like a gazillion of these $1 thermometers. I think this one was from like a test that wasn't going bad and I shattered the bottom of it. So what I'd recommend doing, and this is all going to be coming out in a piece of content, kind of like the 5 things that I would really recommend buying to have the highest success rate with starting seeds, is buy a $1 thermometer from your dollar store and put it in there. Some lights, like your fluorescents, they're going to give off more heat. It could change the temperature in there. But if you have a thermometer in there, you're going to get a bit of a feel for, okay, is it 65 degrees and I need a heating mat, or is it potentially a little bit warmer? What I have in that area is I actually have a heater at the very bottom, like a Dyson fan, and I've just got that set to 19 Celsius. And so basically once it goes over that, it shuts off and it keeps that area in like the 70 to 80 range at all times. Okay. Christy, thank you so much. You're the best. Suzanne, absolutely going to cover off on, not only how to harden them off, but how to successfully move them into your beds, how to set that soil up so that you're in a really good place. Lucille, where do we find all your upcoming sessions for registration? Lucille, I'm figuring it out on the go right now, so I don't have a list even myself. If you have RSVP'd for today, which you have because you're here, you're going to get email notifications, which will come out essentially like a week to 2 weeks before I am hosting a session. I'll be hosting some of them. I'll be co-hosting other ones. We did a seed starting one with a lady who's been gardening for 40 years just a couple of weeks back. And that was a ton of fun because I got to sit back. I got to enjoy my beer during the happy hour on that one. And I just got to moderate the questions for Kristen as she answered all of them. So totally, it was a lot of fun. Shelly, I love this question. Everyone always talks about soil amendment, and I'm never sure what I should be adding since every crop is different. Basic compost question mark. Okay, let's go back to step 1 of what we kind of did in our garden planning, and that's what's your goal for the season. If it is yield, right? So if we think about like some of the cannabis growers, they want those plants like absolutely pumping. And so they have like 25 different amendments. They've got them going in grow bags. They're like rinsing the soil to move all kinds of nutrients out and then pumping other things in. So that's like the most intense end of the spectrum with kind of manipulating your soil to have the plant do certain things. And if you're going for yield, it's a fair move to make. For myself, I of course want vegetables coming out of my garden. I get tons of them, but I don't want to be like stressing about all those different things. I don't want it to be a stressful activity. And so for me, I know that if I'm putting really good compost in there and I'm using worm castings and then the occasional worm teas throughout the season, that maybe there's points where it's got not quite enough nitrogen or a little bit too much nitrogen or not quite enough phosphorus or a little bit too much phosphorus, but like it's going to be pretty solid. And it's going to get the plants everything that they need. And so for me, like that's perfect. I don't need to, have bed A on feeding program X and then bed B on feeding program Y. That to me feels stressful. And so again, I come back to like the goal, because if it is yield for, an individual, then you'd want to be really, really particular about that stuff. But for myself, it's about enjoying my time in the garden. And then I will be doing some, little tests here and there. And that's where I'll get a little bit more scientific on the amendments and feeding plans. From Suzanne, how do you test soil? So I'm actually working quite closely with Element Testing. They're in the lower mainland of Vancouver here, and we're likely going to be putting together a partnership. So Suzanne, if you do want to get your soil tested, send an email through there to jordan@mindandsoil.com, and I'll be able to get you a discount code on that so that you can get your soil tested a little bit earlier. I think it's a really fun thing to do, just to kind of, like learn a little bit about it. Okay, I had one of the questions pop up using the text there. Where to get worm castings? So at Mind and Soil, like all of everything that we're doing is based on worm castings, because I'm a huge believer in worm castings. So if you go to mindandsoil.com and then into shop, you can then select the soil option, which is our worm casting seedling mix. It's exactly what you would need to be starting your seeds. Or if you buy seedlings from the store, transplant them into the worm casting seedling mix immediately, and they'll be off to the races and super happy. So I've got you covered on that one. I'm just going to erase that to pop it off the screen there, but thank you for having that come through. Okay. TJ, same question there on soil tests. Shoot me an email. I'm just, again, in the kind of early discussions with Element, but we're going to be doing some really cool stuff, because I'll be then like doing a bunch of tests with them, and we'll probably have one of their agrologists come on to a happy hour and walk through what the test results mean and what I should be thinking and doing from an amending perspective. So I'm really excited about all that. Sarah, yeah, I'm planning on growing some of my peppers, tomatoes, and pops. Can I plant flowers around the base of the veggie plants, or will they compete too much for nutrients? Kind of a tough one to answer, because, if it's pretty scarce on nutrients at the very beginning of the season, then yeah, you could end up in some nutrient deficiencies. If you're feeding, throughout the season, then it's likely that you can do some companion planting there. So the more that you pack into an area, the more nutrients that you're going to have. And again, you got your two options that you can go down. You can either go compost worm castings, which is your natural, organic, sustainable path, or you can go down your fertilizers path, which again, like a Gaia 444 would be an option there. Okay, I want to redo my ground garden. It is currently a long fence. Is 4x8 raised beds ideal for squamish? Should I leave a gap from the fence? Really great question there, Angie. The 4x8 beds that I showed you, those were here when I bought this house. I'm currently actually putting in like a whole flowing garden on my back fence. Basically what I've done is I've taken landscape fabric and I've stapled that to the back fence. And then I, ran that out, and then I brought river rock in as the edging for that. So it's now nicely contained and flowing. And then I've backfilled with just like a really nice compost that is all I'm not even adding in any peat moss or sand, etc. I'm just going compost. And over the course of like the next 1 year, 2 years, that's going to stabilize into like a really nice soil. Nithya, recommendations for grow lights. I've got 2 of them, excuse me. And I will be more than happy just to email you through links to those. You can order them off of Amazon. They work great. On top of that, there's a way to build like a really easy structure that I just tested and figured out. I'll show you real quick. 1 second. Okay. So if you go to Home Depot or you go to Rona, you get one 2x4 that's 12 feet long. And then you ultimately are going to have something like this. And what you're going to do with that 2x4 is you're going to ask them to cut that into a 132-inch piece, 36-inch piece, 36-inch piece, 12-inch piece, 12-inch piece, and then just screw it together. And then you pop your grow light onto the bottom here. And the grow light that I recommend, it comes with pulleys, so you can drop it down lower to your plants. And then as your plants grow, you can raise it back up. So You can basically have that whole stand put together for 20 bucks. Yeah, Lydia, can you plot out the way you did with your beds the same for containers? Yes, absolutely. So say like a 5-gallon container, I would make the, kind of like rough estimation that that is 1 foot in space. Now, if you're getting up to like, again, like let's use zucchini as an example. It might be that you plant that zucchini in a 5-gallon container, which we would call 1 foot. And the roots will do all right in there. And like if you're starting to get into like a 2-foot pot, like that's a pretty heavy pot and a lot of soil. But keep in mind, it needs 4 feet. So if you did a zucchini in a 5-gallon pot that's only 1 foot, just make sure that you're giving it a couple of feet before your next zucchini plant, because it's going to sprawl out from there. It's going to go every which direction. Zucchinis, they love to get powdery mildew. And if you jam a bunch of them close together, there's going to be no airflow in there. It's going to be humid as they sweat over the course of the day and into the evening. And they're going to end up a bit unhappy. So, get a rough feel for the size of your container. And then, again, place it into your garden and make sure that there's a little bit of space between them. Okay. Somehow there's 40 new messages from where I haven't even started scrolling down yet. So I'm going to stay on here and keep on answering all of these until I get to the bottom. By all means, everybody stay on as long as you would like, or just, drop off once you've gotten the answers that you need. But I'm not going anywhere anytime soon here. Okay, from Natasha, questions about no dig techniques. Do you follow that approach? I'd say short answer, yes, I do follow that approach. However, like this should not be a universal thing, because what if you don't have a backyard with a lot of space? You're not going to be able to then get the benefits of, kind of quote unquote no dig no till gardening. So I like it. I think it's cool. I really, really value like sustainability and going down like the compost worm castings path. So that's kind of the rationale on why I've decided to go that direction. But with that being said, item number 1 in my my growing guide here, or my planning guide, was testing. So I'm going to be testing a bunch of stuff in grow bags this year as well, and that's going to include some like of your more traditional fertilizers. From Kasha, do you just use your worm casting seedlings mix on its own or mix with anything? Kasha, yes, I use that 100% on its own. It's already pre-mixed, so there isn't any worrying, figuring out that you have to do. All that you do is you take one of these guys, fill it up with the seedling mix, tamp it down about 1 centimeter, put the 5 seeds in, add some water, fill it back up with the seedling mix, tamp it down again under the grow lights, you're off to the races. That literally gets me like 90+% germination rate. So that's all that I do at the beginning. If you're going with like a store-bought option that's going to be primarily just peat moss, then you're going to need to buy some kind of fertilizer and then make sure you get like the right ratios, percentages on all of that. So it's just a little bit more hands-on versus this. I won't touch this or make any changes until I move them into the garden beds. And at that point, I'm then going to be getting compost into the mix, because that's where they'll get their macronutrients, their micronutrients, all the microbes and bacteria that they need to grow big and healthy. From Angeline, has anyone seen seed germination mats in Squamish? They do have them at Northwest Gardening Supply, or sorry, Pacific Northwest Squamish, as TJ answered there. Again, you could also just buy those online as well. Okay. From Alex, forgot to RSVP. Are you able to add my email address? Send me an email, jordan@mindandsoil.com, and just ask me to subscribe you to the list, and then I will get you I'll get you registered so you get all the other happy hours that come out. TJ, great to have you. He's probably offline, so I'm probably saying goodbye to nobody, but that's all right. Charlene, send me an email for that link there so I can get that over to you, jordan@mindandsoil.com, and I'll send you that link. You'll get those grow lights. You'll be off to the races, and we'll be starting our seeds under the exact same grow lights, which will be a ton of fun. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys are all the best. Hey, I think I got to the bottom here. Okay. I'm going to hang tight here in case there's any other questions that are coming through from anybody. I don't know how many we've answered here, but that's probably what I love most about these sessions is let's pick a topic, let's cruise through that over the course of 45, 50 minutes, and then let's just have Q&A to help you in any way that I can. All right, looks like things are beginning to slow down here, which is great. Jocelyn, yes, will we just get the info through the RSVP? Absolutely. From Charlene, yes, so Jocelyn, yes, you'll be getting an email tomorrow morning, and that is going to have the recording of everything that we went through that you can refer back to, as well as your grow guide so that you can go through this whole plan for yourself. So that's all going to be in your inbox, and then any future happy hours that I host, you'll get notified and emailed on those as well. From Charlene, do you recommend adding hoop houses? Yeah, so hoop houses are like what you're essentially doing is you're making a mini greenhouse. And so that's a great option if you're able to do that, if you've got kind of like the right structure in place for that. The one kind of challenge that you might have is just like your plants, like my kale plants are kind of like 4 feet tall at this point. So they probably wouldn't fit into a hoop house. So there's a little bit of a challenge on that front. But say for some of your rooted vegetables, could be a really great option to extend that season a little bit further into the fall. I just want to have a greenhouse at some point, and then I can just plant everything in there, and I won't have to worry about spacing or heights and all that. So one day. You're welcome, Jocelyn. Alrighty, folks. Well, I think we are pretty well towards the end here. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down the Zoom and the happy hour here. Thank you all so much for the session, the time. You guys have all been amazing. Loved all the questions that are coming through. And as mentioned there, expect to see an email from me tomorrow, and then the occasional email with the RSVP links for future happy hours. Thank you all so much. Have a great evening. Be in touch soon. Bye.